So we know that children with special needs, by definition, are complex. Although I'm putting a lot of the focus today on the role of the parent and the family, having good professionals and friends to advise you, especially in the early years, is a great help. So at first the parent learns, listens from professionals, and then the parent is able to coach new members of the child's team in the interest of the child. So at first parents are really intimidated, particularly right after a diagnosis. They they find professionals to work with their child. Hopefully they come to ACT and get some advice from us. But they're very often, and this is a generalization, but often very intimidated. And professionals are human beings. Some of them are good at working in teams, and some of them are not so good at working with teams. So as a parent, I always say to families, look for people who are great collaborators with others. If you get a lot of non-collaborative people working with your child, you're not going to get as good of an outcome. And you're going to feel sometimes like you're trying to mediate between conflicting people when there is no need for that. Collaboration is important. And a very good workshop that we have online by Dr. Karen Bopp, that I'll show you a link to later, talks about that need for collaboration. One of the key resources that we have is Chapter 2, Developing a Treatment Team for a Child with Autism Spectrum Disorder. And this is from ACT's Autism Manual for BC, which is out in the front. And you'll see the link there. You can download it free of charge. And it talks about, the various professions, who they are. And this is important for advocacy, because if you don't know what people are supposed to do and what your role is, in a team, it's very easy to sort of step back and let people control things. So for families who have young children, the $22,000 a year only is available until the child is 6. You need to maximize that. And afterwards, you'll have more confidence in terms of following through. But, there is never enough money. And so we all have to be really strategic, because we're very fortunate in BC that we do get some direct funding and we can make decisions with it. Where we're not fortunate, and this is the case internationally, is there are not enough really qualified service providers to meet all the needs of the children. So we have to be very strategic on how we use our funding. And one of the things you can always do is call ACT. If you've got concerns, like something doesn't feel right, that you can call us and discuss with our information officers. Is this how I'm not invited to be part of the team meeting, or I'm not allowed to watch my child's therapy, or I don't feel my child is making progress. These are all things that families talk to us about, and we're very happy to kind of brainstorm. Why do you feel? What's happening? And ACT is not the only organization that can provide that, but we do so much of it that I think we're really very good at it. So back again to advocacy. Why is advocacy necessary? And again, I spoke earlier about this myth that the needs of children and adults with disabilities are automatically provided for by the Government of Canada. And the reality is that access to therapy is limited. There is no right to service. The exception in British Columbia is the Autism Funding Program, which I'll talk about more about later. But if you have a diagnosis, then then you automatically receive funding. What this means is, at a time of government cutbacks, that there are fewer and fewer services and more children with special needs, which doesn't mean that you give up, but it means that you do have to advocate, and why it's a good idea to advocate together about increasing those resources, because these are political decisions, and in this country, families have the right to get together and lobby government about increasing services. And there are a lot of families in British Columbia who get no services for their children who have severe special needs, and they're waiting very long times for speech-language pathology, for occupational therapy. So for me, it's always been, I think, the right way to go is to get together and advocate together to improve funding for services because it has such an enormous impact on children. And also in the realm of the BC School Act, it mandates education for all children, or all children of school age, including those with special needs. And this provides us a lot of scope for advocacy in the education system, but most of you here who have children in the education system can speak to the difficulty, that reality, how that reality isn't quite meeting that. So part of today is talking about policies that we can follow to advocate for our children so that they actually get the services that they are supposed to. I want to put a special word in here about the situation for adults. The majority of adults in Canada with physical or cognitive disabilities live in poverty, and supports from dental care to wheelchairs are difficult to access. There is no right to adequate levels of support in our country. The good news, and there is lots of good news, I mean, there are a lot of initiatives that have been put into place. In British Columbia, the most recent one, which you will hear about if you get our, if you're linked up to News Roundup and you get our notices every month. This month we're going to be sending out a notice about the BC government has now agreed in response to the advocacy efforts of an organization called Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network, to improve financial security for adults with disabilities. So this means that they can have some money, I think it's up to $100,000 in savings, and still get their monthly persons with disability allowance. It used to be if your auntie left you money, unless you had a trust fund set up, you lost your persons with disabilities allowance until that money was used. And so people with disabilities didn't have any cushion, they're always kept just at the edge of that next payment, which is not very much. So that's some good news. And I pointed out to you because that's advocacy, right? That's an issue that all of us, probably our children, will benefit from. And that's an issue of, they've taken on a systemic issue. It affects a lot of adults in the province across special needs. So special thanks to Plan for their efforts. And all of you can become members of Plan. It does cost. It's not a free service, but I would suggest you have a look at it, especially as your children reach their teen years. For families who have children with invisible disabilities like autism, ADHD, fetal alcohol syndrome, it's very difficult because our kids look so good. Often I can remember when Adam was young, I'd say to, he really needs help, and they'd say, well, he's so beautiful, look how bright his eyes are, he could get out of any enclosed area within about 3 minutes. He was the Houdini of the playpen set. But it was not easy to help him, right? So this idea that if it's, and there's something kind of odd. In fact, there's been research done on this, is that many children with autism many of them are extraordinarily beautiful, and they have a really ethereal look to them. And this throws, diagnosticians, teachers, everyone, and then you combine that with some really difficult behaviors. And because difficult behaviors are often associated with poor parenting, it's a really difficult mix for families to deal with. Then the other thing that's very frustrating is that unusual behaviors or difficult behaviors for a child are often attributed to cultural differences for their parents. And I have the unusual experience of having brought up a child in Egypt. And, I know that when we were in public places and Adam was behaving appallingly, many people were saying, these foreigners, they just don't know how to bring up their children, right? And so for all of you in this room or who are new immigrants to Canada, I think about your situations all the time, and I'm particularly sympathetic. Of course, the situation in Egypt was particularly difficult because people are really very kind to children and do actually spoil them terribly. And so Adam would come, we'd be in a public park and people would be sitting at tables and there'd be Coca-Cola, and Adam would just go to someone's table, pick it up and start drinking. I mean, he was 2, right? 2.5. And they'd say, never mind, Malesh, he's thirsty, let him drink it. And even though I didn't know he had autism and I didn't know a lot about positive behavior support, my instincts was that this was not a good idea, right? So I bring that to you. So parents have a big burden in autism and other special needs which are invisible, and that's to educate the community. And I particularly empathize with families who have children with ADHD, where people keep saying it doesn't exist. It's a figment of your imagination. It's the drug companies wanting to push drugs on your children. Well, actually, the research is quite clear that it does exist, and the brains are functioning differently. But can you imagine the exhaustion for families? And most of you can imagine it because you're living it. It's very tiring always having to say, well, yes, he is very cute, but yeah, he does actually need help.